Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today is a new video feature for my channel, which I entitle my Unchained Takes and the TTRPG Hobby. And basically, what this feature will be doing is it'll be my take or my impressions of some newer ideas or trends that I see popping up in the hobby and in the chat around the hobby, whether it be from Twitter or Facebook or some article by a games journalist in one of the online publications that are out there. And although I may not always be in agreement with these trends, I think in many cases I might not be. Um, but in some instances, if I do agree with it, I'm certainly going to put that kind of a video out there as well. So today's video is going to focus on the question of should player consent be required for PC death? So this recently popped up in a Twitter uh, tweet, and looking at the responses, and I won't reveal who made the tweet or put up the tweet itself. Um, I'm just going to deal with the issue of it. But this recently came up within the last several days or even a week, and the argument was that as part of player agency of their character's story, that a player character should never die unless the player consents to it. And I often look at these things from the perspective of a DM because that's primarily how I function within the tabletop hobby. For most of my 40 plus years of experience, I've often found myself um, in that role as dungeon master. And considering that throughout most of my experience in the hobby, I've always created my own content. I've always created my own adventures, created my own gaming worlds, with the exception of perhaps Greyhawk, which is kind of bare bones, and so you can twist and turn that in many different directions as you see fit as a dungeon master. So when player agency over their character comes into play, that involves many different game mechanic aspects, from saying I don't want my character, I never want to lose control of my character, and so they question whether or not there should be an insanity mechanic, which we've seen that come up in games such as Call of Cthulhu. Or they say I never want my character to be charmed from a charm person spell, or held or controlled in mind control spells in any way where I lose control over my character's actions. And if that is done for inappropriate means, and what I mean by inappropriate means is that if you take control of the player's character as the DM, and then you have something done to that character that would not be a socially acceptable thing to happen, in reality, and certainly not something that would happen in a PG-13 kind of a setting, even if your game is not a PG-13 setting. So to have your character have mind control, or a charm person spell placed upon them, and then to have that character molested or worse, then I would say that that's something that's inappropriate, and is grounds to have either a very serious talking to that DM, or to say, listen, I'm out of this game, I'm out of this group, I'm not going to, be involved with that kind of a thing. So if you have a DM that's being a douchebag like that, then I certainly understand why player consent should be required for that kind of a thing. And even if the theme of the game session or the game itself is beyond a PG-13, it could be rated R or whatever, that's still a line that I don't think should be crossed by a DM unless the player is on board. But this is specifically talking about a character's death. Now, from a variety of reasons, and or through a variety of circumstances that occur where the player's consent is implied. All right. As a player, when you sit down at the table and you're playing, let's say you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you sit down at the table and you present your character sheet, and your character sheet has hit points on it, and you have a set of dice in your hand, and you begin that adventure, and you're implying consent that the dice that you roll and the decisions that you make will bear with them the consequences of those dice rolls and those decisions. The fact that your character sheet has hit points on it, and that there's a game mechanic that will kick in should your character go into points. In other words, a death mechanic. Your character can, in fact, die in this game. By sitting down at the table, you've given consent to that. All right? You are not playing a game that does not have hit points, does not have a system of player character death. And in many cases, these game systems do have a number of rolls that you need to make and fail before your character actually dies. And even beyond that, there were still other means from the other players involved where they can stop your character from dying. So there are many fail safes put in place here to prevent your character from dying. But if all is been run through and your character dies, that is part of the game. That's the game part of role-playing game. All right, the role-playing is, I am telling the story of my character. All right, and no one starts a game session with, well, my character is going to die in this game session regardless of what happens. That's just not what tabletop role-playing is. All right, it is not a predetermined by the player, this is what is going to happen. Even for the DM, a DM who sits down and says, well, during this session, Elric the Elf is going to die, regardless of the dice roll, player decisions, or whatever. That is not what tabletop RPG game session is. All right, no game has that written in its rules. All right, what the games have is they give the flexibility for the DM to have a lot of latitude in what they're doing, but still none of them say, you're going to predetermine that this player character is going to die in session 13. No player is coming to the table or should be coming to the table with the expectation that no matter what decision I make, no matter how poorly I roll the dice, my character is going to come through this, all right, with no negative consequences. And the ultimate negative consequence, yes, is your character death. So I think that those asking the question of, or demanding that a player consent should be required for their character to die, um, you're not playing the game that I think you believe you're playing. All right, you're not participating in the hobby I think that you're participating in. All right, you're playing a tabletop role playing game and only concerning yourself with telling the story that you want to tell for your character. All right, and that has nothing to do with what the DM might have planned. It has nothing to do with what the other players at the table may have planned. All right, just imagine if everyone at the table, there's 5 players at the table, and one of them demands, or requires this consent, their consent to be given for their character to die, but the other player characters and the other players aren't doing that for their player characters. They're saying, well, your character shouldn't be the only invincible one here. Your character isn't the only one that shouldn't suffer consequences for what's going on. And so I think it does bring a, an overabundance of importance on what that individual player wants and not what everybody else at the table wants as well. So the only person that should empower this kind of consent is the DM. If the DM says, hey, you know what, I'm only going to, in this game session or in this campaign or at my table, I will only kill your character if you consent to it. Then that's a different thing. Excuse me. That's where the players can then decide, do I want to participate in this this kind of gameplay? And many may not. Many may say, you know what, I really don't like that rule. I prefer that you don't do that. And some might just say, I'm not going to play this, and they walk away from it. So ultimately it comes down to the DM, which might be another hot take, on my part. But that goes to rule 0. So I'm a bit wary about players placing requirements on the application of game mechanics at a table. Anytime they say, well, my consent is needed in order for this to be at a table, and it's not their own table, then at that point, I think the DM should say, no, we're not going to accommodate that kind of a request, or certainly not a demand or requirement that that's the way that this table is going to function. So, once again, I'm hopeful that people who are kind of along these lines of, putting their character story as being paramount to their gaming experience is, I think you're kind of looking at it in the wrong way. You're looking at the game mechanics in the wrong way, and you're not really, playing the game as intended. You're not really playing a game at all. You're trying to participate in what is a role-playing storytelling exercise and not a role-playing game. Games require mechanics, set rules, and in this case, in most tabletop RPGs, the randomness and consequences, both positive and negative, of dice rolls to determine what the outcomes are. So, once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have your own comments to make on this subject, please feel free to leave your comments in there. Feel free to disagree with me, even vehemently. If you're going to give it a thumbs down, please have the courage to come out and say, I didn't like your video, I gave it a thumbs down, and this is why. I would love to engage with you about this issue, and perhaps we can, either convince one another of our own viewpoints, or we might walk away and remain unconvinced of each other's opposing views and leave it at that. But to just give it a thumbs down and then to not leave a comment is useless. It really is. It's not going to affect me in any negative. Oh, I got a thumbs down. It's a completely useless function for you to do that and not leave a comment and explain why you disagree. You're certainly not going to convince me to change my mind, which is a thumbs down and no comment. And if you leave a thumbs up, again, explain why. I would like to know what points that I've made that you agree with. So, but either way, thanks for popping in and watching the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Put a thumbs down with a comment if you didn't. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, because the more subscribers, the more reach these videos will have, and the more people we get in, the more we can have these conversations, and hopefully these conversations will be meaningful. And once again, I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. You stay safe out there. I hope you're enjoying the new year, and we're getting through this new year. Hopefully it's better than the last. If you had to deal with anything COVID related, I wish you health and prosperity, and hopefully we're starting to turn the corner on that front with the vaccine and all of that out there, and hopefully once we get through this current winter season and we get into the spring and summer, we start to see some of the benefits of that as well. As speaking from someone who has spent much of this time housebound, and so I understand that 2020 was a tough year for many people, and let's hope that 2021 is a much better year for all of us. And keep on participating in this hobby. Be vocal on the issues that you think need to be vocalized about our hobby, whether that be old school or new school issues and visions of where the hobby is and where it needs to go. And you all have a great afternoon. Take care.